Hi, good evening. Let's get started here. Let's see, what have we got? As far as announcements are concerned, we are looking for a vacation Bible school director. We need a volunteer very quickly because we got to get this going. I know God's speaking to somebody. If you feel like God's calling you to do this, then please let me know, because if we don't get an answer pretty quickly, we're going to have to do something different. Sunday, special project fund offering will be received. Something about a competition going on. Anybody know about that? Okay, no, nobody knows anything about that. Okay. Mm-hmm. You know, youth class, y'all can get that banner. Y'all can. But you got to be here. Y'all come win it this Sunday. How about that? Y'all take it Sunday. I know you can. Yeah, I think Benjamin has an announcement. When? Mugshots, $10. They will be available on April the 1st. That's on a Friday. When? Yeah. No, it's a treat. What's the, when are they due? 22nd? Ken? All right, so Benjamin's selling Mugshots burgers. If you want one, get with him, and he'll help you out. And let's see. Mention VBS, Sunday school banner. Oh yeah, Saturday, Divide Church is hosting church security training. That starts at 8 o'clock. All right, any other announcements? Any prayer requests? Jeanette Hammonds. Gracie, Daniel Smith, also Donald Rose. He's in the hospital. Has an infection. Any others? Okay. 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 Mm-hmm. Okay. Any other prayer requests? Okay. Your mom and dad, absolutely. All right, let's go to the Lord in prayer at this time. Then, Ms. Downer, would you lead us in prayer, please? Amen. All right, let's go to class. What are priorities? Mm-hmm. So I can almost talk. So a priority can be an idol. Is that what you're saying? We're going to talk about Mary and Martha tonight. So are you a Mary or a Martha? Hmm. How many places in the Gospels do we find the story of Mary and Martha? How many Gospels talk about Lazarus? One? Which one? Put you on the spot. Where is the verse Jesus wept found? It's the shortest verse in the Bible. Did I hear somebody say John 11:35? That's what I thought I heard. And that's the story of Lazarus. When Jesus raised Lazarus from the dead, the the only place that Lazarus is mentioned in the Gospels. Mary and Martha are mentioned twice, but the story of Mary and Martha is only mentioned once in the book of Luke, chapter 10, verses 38 to 42, I think it is. And that's the story we're going to talk about tonight. The other place they're mentioned, obviously, is in John chapter 11, because Mary, Martha, and Lazarus are brother and sister. And it's interesting that in the story in Luke, Luke doesn't mention Lazarus, because Lazarus is not pertinent to the story. The only ones that are pertinent are Mary and Martha. So Jesus comes to their house. Where do they live? I just knew somebody would come off with Israel. We were going to narrow it down there. Bethany. They lived in a house. They did that too. Whose house did they live in? You know, details are really important. Martha's house. Details are really important when understanding Scripture, because sometimes these things, they're little things that are mentioned that really have a lot of impact on the story. And in this particular story, that little detail is significant, because since it's Martha's house and Jesus has come to visit, what does that mean as far as Martha is concerned? She has to entertain. She's the hostess. She has the responsibility of making sure that her guests are taken care of. Excuse me. I do all right until I start talking. Creditis. Good old-fashioned chest cold. So Jesus and his disciples were traveling through, and they stopped at Bethany. Bethany is just outside Mount of Olives, just outside Jerusalem, not far. And when they stopped to visit, and they were there to eat. It's, we don't have a whole lot of information there as to when Jesus first met Mary and Martha. It may be that they were related. We really don't know. What we do know is that they were friends. We know that from John chapter 11, because it tells us that they were good friends. And Martha sent for Jesus when Lazarus was sick. And remember in that story, Jesus, when he got the message, took off and went to see Lazarus, didn't he? He waited. He wanted to make sure Lazarus was dead and in the ground. Now that sounds crazy, but that's because it was his purpose. He had a mission there. But in this event, excuse me, in Luke chapter 10, when Jesus stopped, Martha was excited about the opportunity to entertain. Martha may have been a widow. We don't really know. We do know that Mary and Lazarus lived there in the house with her. It may be that their parents died when they were young, and Martha, being the oldest, was responsible for bringing them up. Whatever the case, this is Martha's house. It's Martha's responsibility. But Mary, being her sister, also had a responsibility to help out. But that's not what she did, is it? In verse 39, it says she had a sister, Mary, who sat at Jesus' feet and heard his word. Another little detail. that's important. Mary sat at Jesus' feet. What does that mean? She sat at Jesus' feet. Honor, submission, yes, but more importantly, excuse me. Thought I'd give my baptism, but I guess I can't. Martha, where do your students sit in the classroom? So would you say that they sit at your feet? Because you stand in front of them? That's what that means. In Jesus' day, when, well, for example, when we talk about Paul, and where did Paul learn? Where did he go to school? He went to school at the feet of Gamaliel. That's what it tells us. That's the way Paul put it. He learned at the feet of Gamaliel, and Gamaliel would have been had been the equivalent of I guess Harvard, Yale today. He was the premier instructor, if you will. So for a person to sit at another one's feet, it signified that they were there to learn. And that's what Mary was doing. Excuse me. She was there at Jesus' feet and heard his word. But Martha, verse 40, but Martha. What does it say about Martha? Depends on which version you look at. King James Version, I think, uses the word cumbered. The New King James Version uses the word distracted. The Greek word that's used there literally means, excuse me, moving about, way about here, going over here, just going around and around, just all over the place. The picture that it paints is that she was busy. She was busy doing, busy working. And Jesus is saying, you're so focused on your busyness that you missed. So what's the lesson here for us tonight? First of all, there's nothing wrong with being busy and doing God's work. Unless, what was that definition of priorities? You said that something that's more important than everything else. Sometimes we make our busyness our priority. Frog got stuck and didn't want to leave. We make our busyness, we take our work and we get so focused on the work, on the doing, on the busyness, that becomes an end to itself. We miss the significance of why we're doing what we're doing. And so, even though there's nothing wrong with being busy and doing God's work, excuse me, we have to be careful that we don't allow the busyness and the work to become the priority. And that's basically what Jesus told Martha. He said, Martha, You're worried and troubled about many things. Now, in verse 40, it says that she was distracted, or she was going all over the place. And these two verbs that are used in verse 41 have this idea of being anxious, of being worried, and being troubled. And she's so worried about having a proper presentation of a meal that she missed what was perhaps more important than even that meal. One thing is needed, he said in verse 42, and Mary has chosen that. Something that will not be taken from her. Do we ever get so busy working that we neglect our time with God? If we're all honest, we'd all have to say yes, we do. Because there's so much to be done. We have so much work that we have to do, or that we think we have to do, and we miss what's really important. Warren Wiersbe made a statement that really stuck to me. He said, what we do with Christ is far more important than what we do for Christ. For submission leads to obedience and service. So what we do with Christ is more important than what we do for Christ. Interesting thought there, isn't it? Because a lot of times we get this idea and we get this mindset, and a lot of it, we were raised in the South. Well, y'all were. I was raised farther south. But anyway, we were raised in the South. And what were we taught as we were growing up? Yes, ma'am, no, ma'am. Yes, sir, no, sir. What else were we taught? Respect your parents. Respect. To be hospitable. We are the hospitality state, right? Used to be anyway. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. And we could just sit around, laze around, and just goof off and do nothing, and everything was just fine, right? We had to do what? We had to work. Our parents took the words of Scripture literally. If you don't work, you don't eat. Right? They just didn't know. They just didn't address it. I learned when I got older that Mom and Dad knew a whole lot more than I gave them credit for. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. The point I'm making is that we grew up in an environment where work was important, work mattered. Lisa and I were talking the other day, and neither one of us can remember our parents telling us that a job worth doing is worth doing well in those words. But they taught us that. My dad did, I know, because if we did a job and it wasn't right, guess what? We did it over again until it was right. And so, even though he didn't use those words, he taught that principle. And we were taught that work was important. We were taught how to work. And we've carried that into the church, that work is important. Again, don't misunderstand me. Work in the church is absolutely vital. We cannot accomplish what needs to be accomplished without the work. However, let me repeat what Warren Wiersbe said. What we do with Christ is far more important than what we do for Christ. For submission leads to obedience and service. So, when we get our priorities right, and God is first, and we're submitting to Him, we're sitting at Jesus' feet like Mary did, we're hearing His word like Mary did, we're learning from Him, then what Wiersbe says is that will lead to service, leads to obedience. Because when we're surrendered to God and we're submitted to Him, then we learn from Him and we will submit to Him. When we look at this story, what we tend to focus on is Mary was too busy and Martha was too busy and Mary was lazy sitting at Jesus' feet. And that's not the message at all. That's not. Well, it is, and sometimes, and that's where I think it's important that we catch that we do have to have priorities. But we need to make sure that our priorities are straight. And between Martha and Mary, each one had priorities. Mary just made Jesus her priority, while Martha was making Jesus her priority, but it was in the form of preparing, serving. The Greek word that's used there is a different form of it means servant, but service, and that form of service is it involves surrender. In the Old Testament, I'm reading in Deuteronomy right now, and I think it's around chapter 12. There's a beautiful story there. I say story. It's more of a command that God gave to the children of Israel. And the command was that every 7 years was Jubilee. And at the end of that 7 years, let's say, for example, 3 years into this 7-year period, I fall on hard times. And so I give myself or sell myself to my brother as his servant. And I serve him. At the end of that 7 years, my brother is obligated to free me. Not only is he obligated to free me, but he's supposed to give me what I need in order to survive while I get back on my feet. That was the command that God gave to the children of Israel. So every 7 years, anybody that was a servant or submitted or surrendered to a brother in service was to be freed. However, Let's say that I really love working for my brother. Now, and there's another passage that talks about this too, and I'll go ahead and bring it in. Let's say that while I'm in service to my brother, he gives me this beautiful servant that he has to be my wife. And we get married. At the end of the 7 years, I'm free to go, but she's not. I have to make a choice now. I can go free. I can have my freedom in more ways than one. Or I can choose my wife. And if I choose to stay, then what they're supposed to do is take an awl, you know what an awl is? And poke a hole in the ear. Put your ear up against the doorpost and just poke a hole in it. And that signifies being a love slave, because you're choosing to stay out of love to the master, or because of the wife, that you're choosing her over your own freedom, and you choose to stay as a servant. That picture of a love slave, it has a spiritual picture as well, because that's what God is asking us to do, is to be his love slave and to be surrendered to him. And the story of Mary and Martha kind of mirrors that to some extent. It's not a clear picture of that, but what we see is Martha is doing the service, maybe not quite with the love. She's doing the service because it's obligated. She's the owner of the house. She's the master of the house. And so it falls to her. It's her responsibility. And so she's doing it out of obligation, not out of love. Mary, on the other hand, is at the feet of Jesus because she wants to learn. She wants to hear. And and it's also interesting that, and Martha may have already said something to Mary, we don't know, but she goes to Jesus and says, make my sister come help me in the kitchen. And Jesus surprised her. That's what he told her. He said, no. He said, in fact, Martha, you got it wrong. Mary's the one that got it right, because she's choosing something that will last her entire lifetime. What you're doing is good for right now, but really has no internal significance. It had to be done, but did it have to be done right then? See, and I think that's the point, though, that sometimes, again, coming back to priorities, it's something that has to be done, but did it have to be done right then? Could she have paused like Mary and sat at Jesus' feet to learn and then gone and prepared? We don't know. We don't have all the details on this. What we do know is that Jesus was making the point that it's not always about the doing, but more about the submitting. And that's what Warren Wiersbe said. It's what we do with Christ, not so much what we do for Christ. That submission will lead to obedience and service. Are you a Martha or a Mary? There are times that we should be both. There are times that we have to be Martha. We have to be working. We have to be doing. We have to be laboring. But then there are times that we need to be Mary, where we sit at Jesus' feet to hear and to learn his word. Any questions? Any comments? it's not the work, it's the why. Why do we do the work? What's our reason for doing it? And because the work has to be done. I mean, if we're going to invite people and expect people to come to our church needs to be inviting. It needs to present well so that when they come, they're pleased with what they see. But again, why do we do it? Exactly. If that's why we're doing it, then we're doing it for the wrong reasons. Mm-hmm. 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 Yeah. That was the old school. If you were going to be on the platform, you had to have a coat and tie on. Yep. Mm-hmm. Mine's sticking straight up. But mm-hmm. Yeah, but it's it's interesting how we do get so caught up in expectations, and those expectations are based on what we learned growing up. I'll be honest with you. It was the first. It was hard for me to get to the point of not wearing a coat on Sunday mornings when I preach, because that was drilled into me growing up that that's just the way it was, even all the way through Bible college. I mean, our dress code at Bible college was slacks, shirt, coat, or sweater. Didn't have to wear a tie necessarily, but we had to wear a jacket or a sweater. The only way that we didn't have to wear a jacket was if we wore a sweater. And it didn't matter whether it was 12 degrees outside or 112 degrees outside. We had to wear the same thing. And I mean, that's just, and so it was so ingrained in me that that's just the way you did it. And how many of you noticed that I actually wore my coat Sunday morning? Mm-hmm. Yeah. Yep. And it was comfortable too, wasn't it? Yeah. Things have changed a lot. Yes. Yes is the answer to that question. Mm-hmm. That's the danger of that it becomes so strict that it becomes legalistic. By the same token, you can be so relaxed that there is no formality. There is no, well, what tends to happen is you lose respect when that happens. And so it's a balance. You have to be careful. Mm-hmm. No. Mm. Appropriately for communion, yeah. Yeah, we have to be careful, and again, it's you can go so far one direction that you become legalistic, so far the other direction that you lose all respect, and there is a middle ground, and that's sometimes hard to find, but that's where we need to be. Is mm, well, last time I heard that wasn't a dispute in here. Maybe it is. I don't know. Hadn't got to my ears yet. So. Well, if all hearts and minds are free, let's stand. We'll be dismissed and go find out if there's some coffee made. Then there will be.